Hello and welcome. I'm Bénédicte de Montlord, President and CEO of World Monuments Fund. And it's a pleasure to welcome all of you today for this Heritage Now event. Our Heritage Now series explores a nexus between cultural heritage and contemporary events. We organize the event of today to explore the situation in Ukraine, what has happened since the beginning of the war, what are the professionals on the ground doing to preserve their irreplaceable heritage, and how international organizations are involved. As of February 25, 2023, the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine has verified damage to 1,322 cultural infrastructure sites, resulting from the ongoing war with Russia. A third of these places are destroyed, and these include libraries, museums, theater, creative hubs, all those institutions that make up the cultural life of Ukraine. As terrible as the effect of the war has been on the cultural environment of Ukraine, saying nothing of the impact in terms of lives, livelihood, and infrastructure, the extraordinary courage demonstrated by Ukrainians has been even greater. I think we've all been impressed every day since the beginning of the war to see so many people in Ukraine coming together to safeguard their treasured places. And it is in support of this incredible mobilization of the Ukrainian people that international organizations have rallied around the heritage in Ukraine and the people that protect it. As for us at World Monuments Fund, we have created the Ukraine Heritage Response Fund since the very beginning of the war, thanks to support from the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation. So 1 year, a little bit over a year now in the war, we thought that it was important to share with you updates on ongoing projects and to give you an inside look at what Ukrainian heritage professionals and international organizations were doing to preserve their irreplaceable heritage. So it's my pleasure to welcome today 4 excellent speakers to inform us about what's happening. So first of all, we are very honored to welcome Katarina Goncharova, who is the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine and who received in 2022 our Watch Award. We are also joined by Alexandra Fiebig, who is Project Manager at the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas. Milena Chorna, an art historian and expert on the cultural heritage sector at the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation and Deputy Director for Development and Communication at the National Museum of the History of Ukraine, is also joining us. And finally, we have Katarina Goncharova, who is WMF's Ukraine Heritage Crisis Specialist. So really thank you, all of you, for joining us today, many of you from Ukraine. And before we begin, I would like to mention that we will have a Q&A at the end of this session and of the discussion. So please don't hesitate to submit your questions through the chat at any time during the talk, and we'll go through as many as possible. So Katarina, I'm going to go right to you because you are the best placed person to talk to us about the situation in Ukraine right now. So can you tell us what is the situation, what has happened to cultural heritage sites, and what are your priorities?
So, dear Benedict, dear colleagues, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this great meeting. It's my great pleasure and my great honor to have this kind of talk today after more than 1 year of full-scale invasion. The situation in Ukraine, unfortunately, is still difficult for cultural heritage protection and for cultural heritage protection activists, for museums, archives, library specialists, and all volunteers who are also involved into the processes of cultural heritage protection now. So the situation, of course, is changing. We understand that all our documentation, all our legislative frame, and all our practice also, unfortunately, has to be rethinked, taking into account this experience we have obtained during this more than 1 year of full-scale war. The problem is that, unfortunately, the resources are also still very limited in Ukraine. And all of us understand that the main part of resources, of course, are focused on our defense and is focused on the potential of the country to be protected, to protect itself. And that means that all our community, and I mean both our ministry, our local administration, institutions, NGOs, local activist communities, and many, many other stakeholders, let's say stakeholders of the processes, are involved into the process to obtain and develop this resource base. And unfortunately, we still do feel the deficit of specialists on site, because as you may know, up to more than for now more than 7 million people escaped from the regions which are very close to fire line, and unfortunately a number of institutions still feel a lack of specialists. Fortunately we know that mainly all is all right with our colleagues who, for example, left the country and are now abroad, or left the region and have their temporary shelter, let's say shelter, in more calm and more safe regions in Ukraine. But unfortunately, it's not a salvation for the problem on sites in the regions which are near the front line. So for the moment, we have evacuated around 200,000 of objects from museums. Our colleagues from state archival services are also evacuated or evacuating the archives. We know that unfortunately the number of heavily damaged or ruined sites of cultural heritage sites or objects of cultural infrastructure is still growing. For the moment, it's up to 1,500 objects of infrastructure, and around 600 of objects of cultural heritage which are identified or checked. And for the moment, we have to restart with our database of damaged or ruined objects of cultural heritage. And also in parallel, we are working on database which give us the possibility to share the information not only about immovable cultural heritage, but also with the museum collections. As you may know, a number of museums also are damaged. For example, for the moment, up to 70 museums are damaged or ruined in Ukraine, unfortunately because of this full-scale invasion. And a number of them were looted, and the collections are also heavily damaged in a number of museums. I guess my colleagues will later tell in details about it, but I must just say that, for example, in Kherson, we have the preliminary accounts of looted objects, and it's about 23,000 of objects were looted from only one Kherson museums, and a few thousand of objects from another one. And of course, we have to now to develop the basement for further work to prevent the illicit traffic, to stop illicit traffic, because unfortunately, in fact, it is also going on, and to obtain an international support in this prevention measures, in risk preparedness system, to develop this risk preparedness system and emergency reaction system at national level, because unfortunately in previous months, during almost all this previous year, it was too hard to develop this kind of system because of limited resources on sites, I mean, in regional administration and institutions. So now we are on this, we are going step by step to develop our instruments to protect cultural heritage in time of war on such a great territory where the so numerous objects are located and numerous collections and numerous museums and numerous specialists need support. So what can I say about the priorities? Of course, now it's still stabilization and conservation of damaged or heavily damaged objects of immovable heritage. It is a digitalization of collections and objects. It's still actual. It is a humanitarian aid for our colleagues and institutions. And I would like also to thank very much for all donors, for all colleagues who gathered all this kind of support and sent to Ukraine. And we still need the support personally for people, because unfortunately the budget of the country is so limited that in number of situations, in number of institutions, we have so low salaries that people unfortunately cannot survive, and they must to find some other way to obtain much more funds for families and for institutions. So we have a huge challenge, or a huge amount of challenges, which just push us to rethink all the system of cultural heritage management in Ukraine, both for this time, wartime, and for post-war period, because we understand that a number of facts, a number of situations which we are facing now will cause a number of changes after the war and a number of consequences after the war. And it's also a very wide field for thinking, for making the strategies, for systems, thinking of systems, because it's also very important to develop this ecosystem, national ecosystem of cultural heritage, which is also connected, as you may understand, also with the natural heritage, and I mean, not only in frame of UNESCO objects, but in general. And it will be involved. Cultural heritage systems are in close contact with all the system of recovery programs, infrastructure, rebuildings, and many other things. And of course, with national remembers, national educational system, and Ukrainian culture is now, unfortunately, because of war, is much more visible in the world than before the war. And all these challenges, our colleagues with their limited resources try to cover. And we are very grateful for everybody who support Ukraine, who support Ukrainian cultural heritage sites, cultural heritage professionals, and institutions. I guess also one of the most important insights of the situation is that we can do much more than we expected. For example, even the evacuation of museum collections, where I guess it's has unfortunately it's difficult for me for now to compare with the situation with in other countries. But for Ukraine, a huge amount of evacuated artworks. It's an unprecedented situation since the time of Second World War, and it's quite another kind of experience. We have never had it, and now we must to analyze and to restart with all these basic processes in Ukraine, in our field, in cultural heritage protection field. So maybe I've missed something, but I'm ready to answer questions. Yeah. We have a number of projects from communication with our colleagues on restoration and conservation measures to digitalization and this large initiative to develop two national platforms for immovable heritage and for movable heritage, for museum collections. It's a difficult task because centralized systems are very hard accepted in Ukraine, but unfortunately we must do it to understand what happened in different regions, in different institutions, to understand how to cover all these issues and all these challenges. So we have a number of plans. We are developing now a number of projects also in frame of cooperation with UNESCO or under UNESCO umbrella, with colleagues from ALIF, from World Monument Fund, and many other colleagues who support us in these processes. And we are not only grateful, we are ready to share our experience. We are ready to create a new standards, new system of emergency reaction for the also for other country, because unfortunately all of us understand that war is, we hope it will finish, but unfortunately it's not a guarantee not to have any other conflicts or natural disasters. So I guess the Ukrainian experience is could be very, or must be very useful also for other communities, and we are ready to share it. So thank you very much, and just ready to join the other.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I think what you just said is so informative, first of all, about this tragic situation, unprecedented, as you said, since World War II, but also inspiring, because seeing all of you, despite the limited means and despite the fact that you have to defend your territory, organizing, mobilizing to save heritage, I think it reminds all of us how important this is. This is about our culture, our identity, the culture and identity of Ukraine, but really of all of us. And I think we are well reminded of that when we see people under attack, spending so much time and energy and resources preserving their heritage. So thank you for that. We'll come back to you for question, and thank you for taking the time. Milena, so you're an art historian, but you're also very involved in the civil society in Ukraine. So I want you to ask you maybe several questions at once, but one, so Katarina has just explained to us how wide the destruction of cultural heritage is in Ukraine. And one burning question is, do you consider that heritage per se was targeted? Or do you consider that it is a collateral damage that happens very often in war? So I think we are all of us very interested by that. And according to you, also, what are the priorities for the Ukrainian professionals on the ground?
Thank you, Benedict. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for all the attendees for joining and for your interest in the matter. The thing with the targeting is, well, it is rather complicated because they do not write on their missiles that they are targeting like this museum specifically, and it is hard to prove. But knowing the history and our relations between Ukraine and Russia, it is obvious that yes, they are targeting. They are targeting cultural heritage and they are targeting cultural identity, because that can be proven by the whole series of actions throughout the centuries. And well, I am often asked, why do you think this war has started? And I keep saying that it has not started yesterday. It did not start on February 24th, and it didn't even start in 2014. It started long ago. And the story is that they have been looting Ukrainian culture for centuries. And well, for example, one of their most cherished icons, Volodymyr, Holy Mother, is a looted icon from Kiev-Pечersk Lavra. Right now, well, the War Museum where I work is located really next to this Kiev-Pечersk Lavra. It's one of the most ancient Ukrainian cultural heritage sites, and it has been rented to Russian church since actually one of the last struggles for independence by Hetman Mazepa in 18th century. And now the Ukrainian state is trying to, to make them leave one of our most cherished sites. And what I've been hearing from the priests, from the Russian priests on the territory of this cultural heritage site, and not only me, but colleagues, museum workers that work on the site, they keep saying, well, now that we are going, well, it's okay if they hit it. It's okay if it is targeted. They are just verbalizing it, in front of the people, and they feel it's okay. So yes, they are targeting, and one of the most, could I have some visuals, please? I believe one of the most explicit examples is, well, as you can see that how many attacks there have been on Ukraine, and they're always repeat, they're mostly repeating, and there's actually no site in no place in Ukraine that it's you can say that it's completely safe. And this is one of the most explicit examples to my mind. The National Literary and Memorial Museum of Grigory Skovoroda in Skovorodinivka. Skovorodinivka is a really small village in Kharkiv region, and it was hit by a direct missile strike at night. The reason it is so explicit is that there is no military infrastructure at all around it. It's a really small village and there's actually no infrastructure at all. But Grigory Skovoroda is one of our most prominent and most beloved philosophers of the 18th century, and we were getting ready to celebrate actually his 300 years anniversary before the war started. Of course, we postponed it, but Russians, they like dates. They like dates and they like symbols. I mean, on the top level, on the executive level. So, and they've destroyed this museum completely. This estate, 19th century estate, 18th century estate, and it's a good thing that the collection has been evacuated, and it's a good thing that almost no one was hurt. Just the guard, but he wasn't hurt badly. So. Now we know of some cases that, for instance, Kam'yana Mohyla, also one of the most ancient sites in Ukraine, archaeological sites, it's been mined all over. But I'd like to emphasize one more thing. At present, we cannot, unfortunately, we cannot estimate, we cannot assess the whole scope of damage. And not only because the war hasn't ended yet, and we don't know what happens tomorrow, but also because there are occupied territories and there's so little information coming from there. So I believe to estimate the whole scope of damage and to prove something, we'll be able, in quite a while. And as to the priorities, starting with the full-scale invasion, I got involved with 2 grassroots initiatives because that was the way I saw for myself I could be helpful to colleague museum workers. It's grassroots initiatives from Lviv and from Kiev Museum Crisis Center. Colleagues were focused mostly on prioritizing saving the museum workers and helping them survive, because as Katarina said, that culture has been underfinanced for quite a while. This is how the museum looked before Russians hit it. The salaries are really low, and in order to survive, especially in the regions occupied by the Russians, our colleagues needed help. So the Museum Crisis Center focused actually on helping the colleagues, and the Heritage Rescue Emergency Rescue Initiative focused on helping with the packing materials and etc. But the museum I work for, as soon as our collection was evacuated and put in a safe place, we prioritized collecting artifacts in the field trips, especially from the deoccupied territories, in order to present them actually to the world as evidence, because one thing is when you see something on video or in pictures, and the other thing is when you see it explicitly in an exhibition. So the museum team, undertook over 30 field trips around Ukraine on the newly deoccupied territories in order to collect and preserve the artifacts that were damaged and the ones that survived, actually, the Russian attacks. So you can see this is from a church in Kiev region. It was a 19th century church, but the cross is believed to be 18th century, and that is actually all that was left from the church. And we've been collecting oral history as well, because cultural heritage is not only tangible but intangible. as well, and they are targeting the ethnic minorities, in my humble opinion, because when you see the Melitopol region, when you see the collection of the Melitopol Museum destroyed, they target Greek ethnic minorities and cultural heritage left by them. In eastern Ukraine, in Donbass, there's been a lot of cultural heritage sites built by European immigrants, European investors of the 19th century, who came actually to industrialize our country, and they've been targeting that as well. So yes, I believe on the top level, they are consciously targeting cultural heritage, but on the lower level, on the level of Russian troops and Russian soldiers, I believe it's just they are looters. They are looters, and what they cannot have, they have to destroy. It's something barbaric, you know, and psychological. So I believe, yes, that on an ideological level, on the top executive level, it is targeted consciously, but the Russian troops, they just keep destroying everything they see and everything they envy. If they see a nice set of cups, they have to break it. They don't know the difference between, you know, Mason vase or Soviet cup. They cannot have it, they destroy it. Well, that's my humble opinion. Thanks.
So thank you so much, Milena, for this testimony about what's actually happening in Ukraine. And I think seeing all those pictures from the ground and what you've been doing is really enlightening. And there are some questions already about evacuation of collections. So I know you've mentioned this, so we'll come back to you on this because people are very curious about how you do that and how you make sure objects can return in the future. But before we do that, I would like to give the floor to Katarina Goncharova. So Katarina is our colleague whom we were able to recruit on the ground at the very beginning of the war, thanks to our Ukraine Heritage Response Fund. The way we work at World Monuments Fund is that we want to be Peruvian in Peru, Indian in India, and obviously Ukrainian in Ukraine. And it's particularly important in crisis situation like this one, where of course the situation is confused, communication is less easy, and so we were extremely fortunate to recruit Katerina almost a year ago now, and she's been making an amazing difference coordinating with professionals and leading projects. So Katerina, can you share with all our members what you've been doing, what is the impact, what are the main projects you've been leading with heritage professionals in the name of World Monuments Fund in Ukraine?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and thank you for a wonderful presentation. I would like to make some slideshow. So since the beginning of the war, we were all very frustrated and are absolutely delighted to have an opportunity not only to work as a Ukrainian for WMF, but also as a Ukrainian to have something beneficial, to do something beneficial for my country and the community of the people that I'm working with. We were lucky to harvest and to implement up to 12 projects right now. And of course, this is not the end because we're going to proceed our presence and our building active partnerships in Ukraine in order not only to preserve immovable heritage, but also to provide the sense of continuity and safety to local communities who are related to those sites. The next one. One of our very first projects that we were able to implement was a protection structure for the Black House in Lviv. That was very early stages because nothing was so obvious as it is now. All connections were broken. So we had to start from the very beginning, starting with connecting people, with building partnership, with the best way we could, despite of an absolutely dystopian situation. So we were lucky to partner up with AFCP, with our partners on the ground in Lviv, meaning museum, historic Lviv Museum, and the NGO, Friends of Historic Lviv Museum, to actually protect one of the most iconic facades decorated by fantastic sculptures, just in case there will be some missile attack in the center of Lviv. So this building and its facade would be protected from the debris. But the main thing that we carried out from this project was how you build the partnership, how you communicate with local actors, how can you assure that this particular means would be satisfying for the local community and for professional community as well, because as you may know, Lviv is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the market square that is a gigantic complex includes this Black House, also is UNESCO World Heritage. So we were absolutely lucky and delighted with our partners and with the reaction of local community. That was just fantastic. Next one, please. And then when I heard that Katarina Goncharova said that we have limited resources, that was absolutely true last fall, because our main resource that we felt a limit of was time, simply because the number of sites that were affected is so enormous. It's so big that we had to do something in order to safeguard those heritage sites that were affected, especially when they were facing challenges of winter. So we were absolutely lucky to provide our support to 3 sites in 3 different regions of Ukraine. And one of them is truly iconic site, the Library of Youth or Museum of Ukrainian Antiquities in Chernihiv. Probably you've seen this building in all medias, because that was one of the very first cultural institutions that was targeted by Russian missiles. And therefore we were ready there on the ground, looking for the reliable partners, looking for evaluating the feasibility of the project, collecting resources that were needed in order to protect this building from the precipitation, temperature jumping, and all of the above. Again, we were absolutely delighted with the partnership with regional administration, and they actually gave us a little gift that will be shipped to New York office in a few days, because again, they were also happy with this partnership. And now we're implementing the second stage of this project that would allow the whole shell of the building to be safely preserved, and thinking about the third stage and thinking about engaging community and thinking about further function of this building. The next one, please. One of the sites that again was affected is the Museum of Local History in Ohtyrka. It's a relatively small city, and this museum again was one of the very first one that was affected by a missile attack and a shocking wave. The local community showed a real commitment to restore this museum. During our project inventorization, we were able to shield windows and put a permanent roof in order to protect the site. And now we're exploring other options, because the director of the museum is tightly connected with local community. We were working with Museum Crisis Center to develop a long-term strategy to build some kind of a community supportive with programs for support local community, and for the museum to host these events, therapeutical events for locals, and then to serve as a symbol of resilience and as a symbol of history, memory, connection, continuity. The next one. And the third of our winterization projects, as you may know, in October 10th, there was a gigantic missile attack, and Kiev was one of the targets. So one of the victims of this massive missile attacks was a Hananko Museum that we're almost immediately get in touch with, and they reported on their damage. So we were again lucky to provide our assistance in restoring the lanterns, in providing assistance in comprehensive research, because the building was very vulnerable to the shocking wave. So we explored all the possible damage that could appear as a result of this missile attack. We have a 3D scan, this building being 3D scanned, and now again we're exploring further options of how can we help this one of the most iconic and significant museum in all of Ukraine to develop their activities despite of ongoing risks and despite of the fact that the war is still not too far from being finished. The next one. And one of our most significant and strategic project is damage assessment projects that we were lucky to partner up with Heritage Emergency Rescue Initiative to not only to analyze satellite images, but basically send a group of multidisciplinary groups of professionals on the ground and to provide full comprehensive survey of those sites that were directly or indirectly affected by the war circumstances. We received a permission to safely conduct our expeditions to Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy Oblast regions last summer. And with this is the project that was supported by WMF together with Cultural Emergency Response. And our partners from Smithsonian and SCRY were conducting the same projects in Kharkiv region. We all combined all those efforts in order to create a database of verified information and comprehensive information about historic sites that were affected by the war. And unfortunately, we couldn't unclose this project because it would literally jeopardize our missions and put people who were on the ground at risk. But now we're preparing a series of events to distribute, disseminate, and present the results of this fantastic and truly strategical project. So you are all invited. We will be sharing our information as widely as possible. So please join and follow us. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. So as we can see, not only you've been very active in the name of our monuments fund as part of our team, but a big part of the work is also coordinating with partners on the ground and with other international organizations, because we know that's always a challenge in a crisis situation, and it's essential not to duplicate effort. And that would lead me to you, Alexandra. So ALIF is the main grant-making organization devoted to protection of heritage in conflict zone. So obviously, since the beginning of the war, you've launched an action plan for Ukraine, and you've been supporting many organizations. So can you tell us more about this action plan, what you've been doing about over the past year?
Thank you. Thank you, Benedict, and the World Monuments Fund colleagues to invite us to this important conversation. As you mentioned, Ukraine has been on the forefront of our work over 13 months now. We mobilized very, very quickly. Our board, within a couple of days, our board gave us a first envelope of $1 million to be able to respond as quickly as possible with small grants, direct grants to Ukrainian organizations responding to urgent needs on the ground. And basically the way we worked was reach out as widely as possible, thanks to our international network, but also thanks to our Ukrainian team that we onboarded. Get in touch, listen to what the museum, archive, library staff was telling us, find practical solutions as quickly as possible. And through this kind of work that has grown, I would say, organically, after 13 months, we were able to support over 260 cultural heritage institutions with over $4 million currently committed. We're definitely not alone in this. we had the support, the generous support of the European Union, the Getty Foundation, and the Principality of Monaco as well. And there was a true international mobilization, I would say, that that also happened to keep this topic on the forefront. If I could have the slides, please. So I will walk you quickly through a few of the priority areas that we've been working on in this first phase. In the first month of the ALIPH support, our work was very much focused on packing and evacuation, as the Vice Minister already mentioned. This is one of the important topics in this period, and this basically translated for ALIPH into the equipping over 100 museums and other institutions with necessary materials to pack the collection. We transported hundreds of specialized museum crates from Switzerland, Austria, Italy, France, and Poland into Ukraine. We supported the creation of 9 storage spaces in safer regions of Ukraine, so much further away from the battle lines. These storage spaces, they were equipped with dehumidifiers, metal shelves, materials to repack the collection if a collection has been a bit hastily packed, proper fire protection, basically anything that would ensure proper conservation conditions for the artifacts that had been put into more safer conditions. When autumn and winter approached and the energy grid came more and more under attack in Ukraine, our priority shifted more towards the provision of generators and power stations with solar panels, so that the institutions and these storage spaces, that they could continue to operate their climate control systems and the security system. Next slide, thank you. Another important aspect of ALIPH's work, and I think we heard it from all the 3 speakers before, is the support to the heritage professionals in the country themselves. I fully share at ALIPH we have the deepest respect and admiration for the steadfast and tireless work of the cultural heritage professionals, museum directors, workers, conservators, archaeologists, librarians, who continue to work in the most difficult circumstances. The grassroots initiative that was mentioned by Milena, we wholeheartedly supported them, because they really stepped in when in the country the community of heritage professionals found themselves with cut salaries, no salaries, difficulties in food provision and basic healthcare, and so on and so on. Overall, ALIPH supported more than 400 cultural heritage professionals. Over 70% of them were women. And apart from the financial support, we also supported institutions to continue to care for the collection, but with the provision of conservation equipment, conservation vehicles. On the screen here, you can see the team from the National Research and Restoration Center, which is a specialized national institution that cares for museum objects. Conservators, this institute we equipped with what we call heritage ambulances, which is a vehicle equipped with emergency equipment for conservation. Their team from the NRRC, they can go now around the country when the security situation allows, visit damaged museums, assess the collections, make sure that very certain objects are being transported in a proper way. So people, collections together, very important part of Alif's support work. The next slide, I wanted to give you an insight into the work on the documentation of architecture. Katarina Goncharova already mentioned the importance of documentation of architecture for the future restoration efforts. And at Alif, we fully share this, this priority. And therefore, Alif partnered with 2 Ukrainian companies who are experienced and specialized in 3D documentation and photogrammetry. You can see them here on the slide, working in the Lviv region, scanning the 17th century Church of the Sacred Heart in Lviv. The documentation is always done in cooperation with local authorities and following very, very strict safety rules. We can move, and we hope that this work will also feed into the future recovery process led by the authorities. A last example I wanted to give you is an architectural stabilization project that we supported in Kharkiv. It is the Research Institute of Neurology that was built in 1889, located in the center of Kharkiv. The building had authentic interiors with very elaborate stuccos, wall and ceiling paintings, and it was hit in March 2022 by spent missile, and our grant contributed to the roof stabilization and to protect the interior and the building from the elements. This was implemented by the Alchevsky Biketovi Family Foundation and is co-funded with several German and Ukrainian partners. So these are a few examples of the type of work that Alif supports in Ukraine. And I just wanted to say that we will continue to stand by the side of our Ukrainian partners to listen very carefully and to follow and to try and support as much as possible the work in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I think it's great to see what you're doing, and I think it gives our members an idea of the priorities now that is really support to the people themselves, the heritage professionals, documentation, and temporary measures. Because the question we get very often is, what are you deciding to support now? Are you going to rehabilitate completely a building that's going to be destroyed right after? So maybe that's a question for you, Katarina and Katarina. Like, how do we make sure, first of all, that heritage professionals are secure when they do their work? And how do we choose projects that, you know, as you said, there is no zone in Ukraine that is safe. So how do we define those priorities? And are you looking into rehabilitating full buildings that have been impacted?
So thank you very much for these questions. It's really a crucial question, and it's a great discussions every time, because unfortunately the number of damaged objects are so high that we must really think very carefully about this criteria of this choice, because it's very responsible choice for every party which have to make this choice and decisions. What is crucial, of course, the safety of people who are working. And unfortunately, all of us understand that a number of regions or districts, sometimes it could be district like in Kharkiv, for example, that we have, for example, some districts which are more or less, let's say, good for work on site. But we have also some districts in the city which are under shelling, very intensive shelling, and it's impossible for people to do something there. So the same situation is in a number of regions, near our borders, first of all, where the most intensive fire lines are for the moment. And of course, in the Zaporizhia region, so southern and western part, part of Ukraine are under fire. And all of us understand that we can make some monitoring, we can make some documentation. Sometimes it could be done remotely thanks to our modern technologies like satellite images, but or taking into account the possibility of our colleagues from army, we can also do something with their help. But in fact, any kind of stabilization on conservation works, we even not discuss the full reconstruction or restoration, but just even for some first measures, some first steps. Unfortunately, in a number of regions or districts, it is not possible for the moment. Moreover, we know that a number of cities are for the moment completely destroyed. We know this about Mariupol, we know this about a number of small cities in Donetsk region, in eastern part of Ukraine. And we understand that we have lost completely all these objects. So it will be the next step to understand after the deoccupation how to proceed with it. And when the situation, the safety situation is more or less safe or flexible for some projects, first it's a documentation and analysis. And of course, we have to make consultation with our colleagues in security services. What is the prognosis for these regions? How it is possible to plan, to make some plans? To be honest, it's very difficult. Almost always we understand that we have to undertake the responsibility, and the people in local administrations or local communities undertake the responsibility by themselves to start with some works. And the criteria is, of course, the quality of objects, this kind of architectural or artistic value, etc. So it's discussed via our discussions. So in discussions, I'm sorry, with our colleagues from expert field. It could be first national objects or very significant objects for local communities, like, for example, in Ochtyrka or in Chernihiv, because I don't know why, to be honest, why these objects are still not have a national level of protection, because in Ukraine we have two levels of the system. It's local significance and the national significance. And the number of objects are inscribed into this local significance level, but they are really priceless for local communities. They are symbolic, they have a full of history in background, let's say, and so the value, this remembrance value, national memory or remembrance, history, architectural or artistic values, of course, is the first one, and the possibility to make these conservation measures, I mean, even in technical details, because sometimes we understand that if the roof is damaged, it's crucial, because if you do not have roof, you will lose the whole objects. In 1 or 2 years, it will be destroyed completely because of rain, snow, etc. So it's number of checkpoints for every time, for every situation, and we have to make this choice responsibly. And for example, I guess that Ochtyrka is one of the best cases, because Ochtyrka was, it's a museum building that Katarina has mentioned in her presentation. And this museum building, at the moment of attacks, some objects were inside, the collections was inside, unfortunately. And of course, it's understandable that we must just to take out the collection and to go with the conservation measures. It's just obviously. And this nuances every time are discussing, and the choice is made, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katarina. And we have many questions and just a few minutes left. So I'm going to go through them. No, don't worry. Just go through them as quickly as possible. And if you can, I know you will have the answer. So first, there were some questions about what type of heritage was destroyed and what information was available. What kind of Jewish heritage was damaged, and also were houses of important artists damaged? So can you answer that quickly, Milena? Do you have some elements of answer? I'm sure you have.
Well, I believe that's a better question for Katarina.
Okay.
But as far as I know, the Jewish heritage mostly is preserved in the central archives, and thankfully they are safeguarded. And there was slight damage to literally memorial museums and to the homes of our writers, Kotyubinsky, Budynok Slova in Kharkiv, but as far as I know, none of the homes of the internationally renowned artists suffer.
Katarina Chieva, do you want to complement that on the Jewish heritage and artists?
Just very brief comments. First, if you may remember, in the first months of war, the Babin Yar in Kiev was targeted. The main target, we guessed that it was our TV center in Kiev, but the place of national remembrance and the place of tragedy was targeted by Russian missiles. So it was one of the most significant situations, and of course some monuments in different cities which connected with the Jewish place of memories. And I'm not sure that I can now speak about the concrete numbers of objects in museum collections or in archives. We will see it, unfortunately, I guess, just after the war, because all the information we have now about this lost part of collections or looted collections are just a preliminary information. So we will see the whole picture after the war, but unfortunately, it's we have a number of objects, of course, also in museum collections, and it's difficult to imagine that no one is lost for the moment.
Thank you. Then I will ask two questions for also Katarina Goncharova and Milena, who are on the ground. So one of them was a question by one of our members who asked about return or displacement of collections, that they are necessary to move them, but how do we make sure that they will be able to return? And then we have several questions about how can we help, like what is the best way to help? Is it through donation? Is it through volunteer organization? I think both of you are on the ground and can answer those two questions, but maybe we start by the museum one with Milena.
Okay. Actually, the only thing I could communicate verbalize is that, for instance, on February 24th, in our museum, we had on display an international exhibition where we had exhibits, absolutely unique exhibits from American museums, from American libraries and archives, and they presented the struggle of Ukrainians for independence in the early 20th century. And well, actually, we were, as the question, as far as I remember, was, is it okay to exhibit them or safeguard them in foreign countries? Well,
yes.
As it was a temporary exhibition, yes, we are now exhibiting it in Baltic states. So I can say that we were lucky enough.
So there are international agreements in place so that they can return afterwards.
Yes, but I believe on the mechanisms, it's again a question for Katarina Goncharova much more than for me.
Yeah.
We were focused on helping the museum workers and helping the museum workers to evacuate, because quite often they were stuck on occupied territories because the cities and towns were occupied really fast, especially in the east and in the south. So as long as we had some cell connection, we were trying to bring these people onto the Ukrainian, territory, Ukrainian controlled territory, and that was kind of hard because sometimes, and I would like to stress that out, Ukrainian museum workers, they are really selfless, and sometimes to a point of I don't know, self-sacrifice, because they are mostly women, and they're often single moms due to the war and due to the situation, etc. So we were sending money, for instance, for these people to evacuate, because it took a lot of money for them to get out of the occupation. You had to bribe almost every Russian soldier you met on your road. And quite often we heard in return, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot leave. I spent all my money. They were selling some kind of paintings and I wanted to buy them for the museum collection, you know. And you're like, really? Museum workers are mostly thinking they are prioritizing their museums and their work.
So yeah, and about, so maybe Katarina Goncharova or any of the Katarina, like, so what is the most useful thing to do for people who want to help? Like, should they send donation to charity? Should they go to volunteer organization? What should they do?
It depends on your intentions. If you simply want to provide assistance to Ukrainian museum workers, please contact Museum Crisis Center because they provide all assistance to the people on the ground. If you would like to support our actions in safeguarding irreplaceable, meaning immovable heritage, please visit WMF webpage and you'll find an easy way to support our actions on the ground. And through our projects, we're also supporting local communities and the community of professionals who we engaged in our projects. And I wanted to add a couple words about safety. Our projects that we're implementing, it's not about securing the people, it's about mitigating the risks of their presence on the ground. So for example, for Chernihiv, it was not only about talking to the locals, it was not only about visiting the site, it was also when the street lights were brought back. Because as you may know, in all of Ukraine, there are no pointers on the road, there are no street signs, but when they were returned, it was a sign that this place is safe, so we can go there. But otherwise, for example, from Kherson region, the 2 days after Kherson was liberated, we already received an application to stabilize historic building of German church. But of course, we could not go there because the team that would be working on site could not be in any way safe. So sometimes safety is a #1 criteria, as if we don't feel like we can provide any security, we unfortunately have to postpone those projects.
Thank you, Katerina. And then Alexandra, maybe last question, because then we are out of time. But there is a question about protecting intangible heritage. So is this part of your mission, Alexandra? Do you have projects that you've supported to protect intangible heritage?
Yeah, intangible heritage is part of the ALIF mission. It is something that is very, I think protecting people is part of protecting intangible heritage a lot. So the support to practitioners and the support to also museums that present intangible heritage practices in various regional museums, that's part of it. I can remember one specific project that actually happened around Easter 1 year ago, where ALIF supported the transport of the eggs, the painted eggs that are very much part of the Ukrainian heritage tradition, and it was a transport of 100-year-old painted eggs from the east to the western part of the country. This is the way I support it, and
that's true. And I think it's a good moment to all look, if you don't know the Pysanka eggs, like to look at them out, because they are truly beautiful and an incredible part of the culture. So we have a lot to talk about. There are many questions. Don't hesitate. We will drop a few links to answer your question, to give you resources, to get more information. But I really want to thank our panelists. As you've noticed, all of them are women, and I think it was noticed by some of our speakers today that many heritage professionals in Ukraine are indeed women. Women are on the ground safeguarding their heritage of Ukraine for the next generation. So I just want to say also how impressed I am by your courage. Milena, Katerina, and Katerina are joining us from Ukraine, where they are working all day long in sometimes very unsafe circumstances. I also want to take a moment to thank all the donors who have supported our Ukraine Heritage Response Fund that has allowed us to make such a difference, recruiting Katarina first and then leading all those projects on the ground. And we are, of course, we will continue to work. There is so much to be done, as you've heard today. So really, thank you in particular, of course, to the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation, who has given the lead support for this fund, but also for all of you who have contributed. And the proceeds of the event of today will go to support the Ukraine Heritage Response Fund. So please stay updated, follow our newsletters, follow us on social media. We will keep you informed of these efforts that are ongoing in Ukraine. And I want to thank all the panelists and all our members who have joined us today for this event. And I wish you a great day. Thank you.